Howdy, my name's Corey Peltier, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma in the Department of Educational Psychology. So today I'm here to talk to you about how to use Excel for progress monitoring. Some of you might be wondering, why on earth would I use Excel when I have a lot of these computer-based programs that will do this for me? Well, there's two main reasons I think it would be beneficial to pick up Excel. The first one is if I'm wanting to track behavior on task, off task, maybe disruptive, maybe some type of social skill, well, I can't just use these academic progress softwares to do that. The second reason is if you're looking at progress monitoring and you're using some of those computer-based programs, they might actually be misleading your visual analysis. And there's a line of research emerging from school psychology that's looking at what graphical elements might impact type 1 errors. And for progress monitoring, what type 1 error means is me as the visual analyst or the teacher is saying, yes, this student is responding when in fact the student is not. And basically what these researchers are finding is there's certain elements related to the ratio of the X to Y axis that can impact that decision-making process. So if you generate it in Excel, you're able to manipulate the X to Y ratio yourself, whereas a lot of those computer-based programs, you can't do that. All right, so now let's get oriented. So the first thing you need to figure out is how do I want to organize all of this data? And as teachers, we're constantly dealing with paper data, we have computer data, and it can be almost cumbersome. And there's nothing worse than spending so much time collecting it and then never looking at it because it's not organized it's not organized for me to use. So my one recommendation would be perhaps organizing by student. So I could have one Excel document for a student. And you can see in this example, that's how I've organized my data sheet. I have my student Val, and I have oral reading fluency on this tab. I have digits correct per minute on this tab, and then I have on-task behavior on this last tab. I find this convenient because if I'm going to an IEP meeting, I'm talking with parents. If I'm going to my grade level team, I have all the data for the student on one Excel document. I do know a bunch of teachers here in Oklahoma who organize data differently. What they do is they have oral reading fluency on one Excel document, and each tab is one of the students on their caseload. That's another systematic fashion in which you can organize data. You'll need to make that decision on what works for you. The next thing we need to figure out is, what do I want on my Excel tab? And I would suggest the following headings. You can have the date, and just to recall, like you might administer 1 week on a Wednesday, 1 week on a Thursday. So it can be helpful to just know when did this data collect. Never mind if you have spring break, stuff like that. All of that could impact how we look at data trends. So you can plot that there. We'll have our weeks numbered 1 through 40 because there's 40 weeks in a school year. And then we're going to have the actual data that we collected that we're going to plot. And in this example, this is oral reading fluency from Dibbles Next for 3rd grade. And I have this fake data plotted. The last two things I would suggest plotting is the instruction that's occurring and then the notes. You can be as specific as you want in this instruction tab. For this example, I kept it pretty generic. Students were the student was receiving tier 1 instruction and also supplemental tier 2 instruction. The data set I made up was that the student was below the cut score on the universal screener, so they started off receiving tier 2 intervention. And what you can notice is in this example, I wanted to highlight what it would look like if instruction was intensified. So the student was receiving an increased dosage, so 4 times a week rather than just 2 times a week. The last thing I would suggest adding is a notes column. And these can be any anecdotal notes you want to add related to these probing sessions. So maybe the student comes to you and says, I didn't eat breakfast this morning. I had a fight with my mom this morning, and they were just a little bit cranky, grumbly as they were getting ready to take the probe. I might make that little note here because in real life scenarios, we often get variable performance from students. And if you have a lot of noise or variability in your data, that can make it extremely challenging to begin to make decisions for how to intervene with the student. But if I notice some type of pattern of, dang, every time I took a data point when the student complained about not eating breakfast, it was way lower than the other ones, right? That would be correlational, but at least I could have a gauge for what's happening. And then the last thing you can notice here that I put on my data on my data is we have the end of year benchmark. So for Dibbles Next for third grade, the end of year benchmark is 123. We're going to want to plot that from the get-go. And I calculated the rate of improvement or the slope. If you look at some of our other videos, we made it as part of this progress monitoring series. We go into much more depth on how to do that. I'm not going to do that in this video. Okay, so now we need to actually build the time series graph. So I'm going to highlight our week and the oral reading fluency data all the way down to 40. I'm going to insert, and Excel has a bunch of options for us. What we're going to want is a line graph because we're graphing data over time. And you can see we have a bunch of options. I personally do not like these smooth lines because the problem is if I'm collecting data on a bi-weekly basis, I don't have a data point every week, and this will not tell me when I collected data. So I always prefer to know exactly which data, basically I want to know what my data points were. So I'm going to choose this one. And you can see we get this generic Excel graph. And I'm going to tell you right from the get-go, very rarely am I going to keep the default settings from Excel. So this is actually the weeks graph, so you can eliminate that. I personally do not like horizontal lines on my graphs because we're going to add an aim line, we can add trend lines. I feel like those get in the way, so I'm going to delete those. The next thing is I don't really need a title because I already have my tab titled, so I'm going to eliminate that. And I only have one dependent variable plotted here, which is oral reading fluency, so I don't need this either. Okay, now we have a generic graph. This is not super useful to us right now. And I'm also going to make it a little bit prettier because I like my graphs to look nice. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fix my ordinate. So I'm going to double click this, and you can see Excel defaulted to 140. And when I mentioned earlier, one of the elements that can manipulate our decision making about graph data is what we set our Y maximum at. And for data that does not have an upper bound limit. So for example, if I'm doing percentage based, my upper bound limit for percent is 100%. So if I cut my Y max to 80% or 60%, clearly that's going to impact how I view the data if I didn't scale it to 100. For oral reading fluency, there is no Y upper bound max, right? Students can read 1,000 words per minute, maybe. So what my recommendation is, and what people recommend in the field, is you look at your end of year goal. And what you want to do is you set the Y maximum slightly above whatever that upper end of year goal is. So on this, it's 123. And for our graph, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this at 130. And by setting it at 130, I can then change my major units to just jump by tens. And now you can see it's 0, 10, 20, 30. That looks pretty to me. It's visible, it's viewable, all of it's fine. The next thing I need to add are tick marks. And I'm only going to add tick marks that are major. So at 10, 20, 30, I want a tick mark on the graph to know where that value corresponds with. I do not like anything impeding my graph space. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this to go on the outside. So you can see all the tick marks are now outside this Y-axis line. Now we're going to go over to the bucket, and we're going to add, we already have a solid line here. I like to make it 1 point so it's a little bit thicker. And now we actually have a viewable, I pretty much like that. So now we're going to go to the X-axis, and I'm going to double click this, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to add a solid line here, and I'm going to make it 1 point font, and then I'll press this button to get over to our tick marks. We'll add tick marks on the outside. And then the only other thing is you can see these numbers get kind of scrunched down here once they convert to 2-digit numbers. So I'm actually going to label these. Instead of labeling every single point, I'm going to label every other week. So I'll just put a 2 here. And you can see that makes it a lot cleaner to read. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is I need to fix the actual data value. So I can right click, hit Format Data Series, and it will pull up some options for me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our markers. And I personally like to have markers with lines on them because it's a little bit cleaner to read than just circles. So I'm going to choose the square, and I'm going to make them 6 point just so it's a little bit bigger. Solid fill, black, solid line, black, and all of that is cool for us. Now I also am going to change the line. I'm going to make it solid line. It's black. I find 2.25 point, that's the default for Excel, to be a little bit thick. So I'm going to make it 1.5 point. And now we have this very clear data. The one problem right now is we can already see we changed instruction. I do not want a consecutive line because these data don't correspond to the same type of instruction the student was receiving. So what we can see is between weeks 8 and 9 is when the team made the decision to change instruction. So here's data point 9. And if I right click data point 9, I can hit format data point. And what I can do is when I go to line, if I press no line, it now has eliminated that. So this helps me visually see this data corresponds with this, and this data corresponds with this. The next graphical element we'll add to make this even cleaner is we're going to add a phase change line. So we can go to shapes, insert a line. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a vertical line between these two phases of data. And I'll format it, black point, make it a little bit thicker, and then you can keep it filled in, or you can make it dotted. Doesn't really matter. So that's nice and pretty. The next thing we can actually do is if I wanted, I could add a text box here and say tier 1, tier 2, and then add a text box here and say tier 1 plus tier 2 plus increased dosage, and that will let me know something changed. So another graphical element that could impact our visual analysis of our progress monitoring data is the ratio of the X length to the Y height. And this team of school psychologists have been doing research in this area. And what they found is if the X axis is too short in comparison to the Y height, our type 1 error increases. And what that means for our purposes is I am more likely to say a student is responding when in fact they are not responding. So we might end up thinking a student is fine when they are not on track to meet their end of the year goal, merely because we're looking at a distorted graph. And what I'm going to show you is this is the exact same data series. So here's the data series, here's the data series, and what you can see is, I'm going to lengthen this out a little bit for us. And so here it is. And when we squish this data, so I'm going to squish it a little bit, what do you notice happens? It visually looks different to me. This slope, or the rate of improvement during the intensified instruction, looks steeper than the slope or rate of improvement for this graph. And that is only changed by squishing this graph closer together. And basically, when I was talking about using computer-based programs earlier, these researchers have found that some of the computer-based programs give you graphs that are too scrunched instead of being spread out. However, I don't think you need to get down in the weeds with calculating their metric yet, because what we do for progress monitoring is we actually add an aim line. And because we have this aim line drawn, it helps us overcome some of those issues. I just wanted you to be aware that those are prevalent. So our aim line is going to go from our baseline data point all the way over to our end of the year goal. And you can see by adding this, even if our data is scrunched, and I can actually add one on our scrunched data set too. As long as we're being cognizant that, hey, by scrunching the data, the trend appears to change. And we need to really, really think about how the data looks in comparison to our aim line. I think we can overcome these issues. And you can see by looking at the data, I'm going to zoom in on our graph here, we can see, oh my gosh, all of these data points are below that aim line, which means the student is not going to meet that end of the year goal given their current trend. And as we intensified instruction, we can see this trend increases. These data points begin to appear above our aim line. So this student is progressing at a rate that will be above this end of the year criterion. And I do want to echo back, if you watch some of our other videos, we show you how to calculate the rate of improvement. It is super valuable, even if we can do this visually. I just want to echo back, our visual analysis can get distorted. So if we calculate the rate of improvement of the aim line and then compare the rate of improvement for this data series, we can look at, oh, their rate of improvement here is 1.4 correct words per minute per week. And the rate of improvement for the AIM line is only 1.2 correct words per minute per week. So their rate of improvement is steeper here than the AIM line, which means they're A-OK. So we can kind of, using those quantitative metrics, I know they require math, they require a little bit more time, but they can help us make more informed decisions rather than strictly relying on visual analysis. I don't necessarily think we would always need to calculate the rate of improvement. If this data series was much more visible, so I'm going to change these values quick for us. If this was our data series, I don't need to bother going through the math of this. He is clearly, she is clearly responding at a rate that's going to be above the AIM line. But if it's kind of tracking close to the AIM line or there's some variability here, that's when we might want to dig a little bit deeper into the data that we've collected. So I just want to echo back, we have other videos in this series on progress monitoring, so please look at those. We'll go much more in depth on some of the reading, spelling, writing, mathematic measures and what those mean. And we also have another video that goes through a little bit more in depth how to calculate the rate of improvement, how to make some decisions about setting that end of the year criterion. It was great talking to you. If you ever have questions about any of this, feel free to email me. My email's included on some of those PowerPoints at the end of the very last screen, and I'd be happy to walk through some of this with you.